Okay, welcome to one and all, and whether you're with us live or if you're going to be watching this later on due to load shedding, nonetheless, welcome also to another session of Gemora Makas. Generally, during this time period, we would dedicate our Wednesday night shiurim to high holiday prep. But there is a lot going on and it is busy times, and I'm going to suffice with, for now, with my daily 10-minute Vertelach between Mincha and Mariv, focusing on the high holidays, and hopefully there'll be enough material there for people to inspire themselves and channel in and tune into the high holiday feel. And we're going to continue with the regular Gemora Makas for now. There's only a capacity one can carry. And it's a busy season building the shul and rebuilding the shul for Yom Noraim and preparing for the high holiday season. So please do tap into those 10-minute recordings as they're sent out, so that way hopefully you can benefit and your family can in preparing themselves and getting their minds switched on for the high holidays coming up. So we are going to continue on page 15A3. 15A3 in Gemora Makas. And we're on the right-hand column. And we are going to start a new question tonight. And the question is based on the principle that we spoke about previously. And the principle that we spoke about was, what happens if a positive commandment precedes a negative commandment? In other words, what happens if the positive commandment isn't there as a remedy for the negative commandment, but rather is there as a standalone positive mitzvah? In the terminology we used last week, it's a preceding. It precedes the negative commandment. It's not following the negative commandment. It's not a remedy to the negative commandment, but rather it's a standalone positive mitzvah in its own right. Okay? And we said in that case, he will deserve malchus. He'll deserve lashes for the negative prohibition. Even though there's a positive mitzvah that's in the same context. So even though he could correct the situation by the positive commandment, but because the Torah did not indicate that this positive commandment is a remedy, because it's not a remedy for the negative prohibition, therefore he deserves malchus because he's done wrong. That's the principle we established last week. And Rav Papa, in the opening line of the Gemara today, questions that. So Amalei Rav Papa l'Rabba. So Rav Papa says to Rava, Rav Papa asks Rava, why is it that if there's a malchus, if there's a positive commandment preceding the prohibition, then you receive malchus? Why do you get lashes for that? And he asks the question, question mark. Is this prohibition not similar to the prohibition about muzzling, which is the prototype for all malchus-bearing prohibitions? Why is it the prototype? Since the prohibition against muzzling has no positive commandment associated with it, a prohibition preceded by the positive commandment is dissimilar to the prototype, and should therefore not carry the penalty of malchus. In other words, if you look, let's look at 14b for a second. 14. Oh, okay. Gemora there spoke. One second. Yeah, okay. So the Gemara there spoke about the case of muzzling, where there's no, in other words, you're not allowed to allow your animal to roam freely and to graze into somebody's property. Okay, now there's no positive commandment associated to it. Now that's the prototype. Okay, but here there's a positive commandment in the case we're discussing. In other words, in the hypothetical case. So in the case of muzzling, and he writes over here, right, muzzling, I want to find that thing in a second, where muzzling becomes the prototype for Malchus. One second. If I find it quickly, we'll go to it. If not, we'll move on. No, I'm not finding it on 14p. Okay, I'm not finding that. But nonetheless, the Gemara is establishing 14b. No, I'm not finding it. Gemara is establishing No. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So let's see the question. The question is the prototype, which is a classical case of Malchus, is a case of muzzling an animal where there's no positive commandment at all. Okay. It doesn't say, and you should muzzle your animals. It doesn't say that. It says you shouldn't allow your animals to roam freely in someone else's property. That's the terminology. There's no positive commandment. So that's why there you get Malchus. Why do you get Malchus? Because you transgress the prohibition of allowing your animals into somebody else's property. But here, in the case of the Gemara, it's slightly different. Because here there is a positive commandment. It happens to be that it's preceded by the positive commandment. In other words, it's not there as a remedy per se for the negative mitzvah, but nonetheless, the Gemara is asking we should not have lashes for it, because the positive commandment could fix the negative prohibition. So if it fixes the negative prohibition, why do you need Malchus? That's our question.
Rabbi, you would expect that the positive commandment to fix it would be after the negative commandment, but not preceding it.
Exactly. That's the Gemara's point. The Gemara is saying that when you have a mitzvah that precedes it, it's not there as a remedy. If it was there as a remedy, the Torah would say it afterwards. And the Torah would say that doing X is a prohibition, but if you do A or you do Y, you'll remedy the sin that you transgressed. That's how we understood it till now. What he's saying is that even a mitzvah that precedes the prohibition, even a mitzvah that precedes, even when you have a positive commandment that precedes the prohibition, it should still have influence over the situation. Okay, so in other words, it may not be considered a remedy per se, but it's still better off than a case like muzzling that has no positive commandment at all. So that we're trying to distinguish. We're trying to say muzzling, we understand why there's lashes, because there's no positive commandment at all. But in our situation where there is a positive commandment, albeit that it precedes the prohibition, should still let the person off the hook with malchus? That's the question now. So Amalei, so Rava answers, well, on the right-hand column, Daryl, on the right-hand column, third paragraph. Amalei, the Kosabe Rachamana, Ase Yasera, Migra Gra. Is it because the Torah gave you a positive commandment? Does it now make it less than a prohibition, or a lesser type of prohibition? In other words, like Lewis was saying, so what if there's a positive commandment? The positive commandment is unrelated to the remedy. So if it's unrelated, it's not a remedy because it was written before the prohibition. So because it was written before the prohibition, it has nothing to do with the love, with the prohibition. And therefore, it should not be less severe than a regular prohibition. And just like a regular prohibition deserves malchus, so too this prohibition would deserve malchus. There's a positive commandment beforehand. Okay, true. There's a positive commandment beforehand. But the bottom line is the prohibition is a prohibition. And because it's a prohibition, you deserve malchus for it. That's his answer. So, in other words, what he's saying is, I don't see a reason to differentiate. I don't see a reason to separate between this and mazeling. Yeah, mazeling has no mitzvah, positive commandment. It's true. But why would this prohibition that we're discussing here, the theoretical prohibition, why would it be any less severe just because there's a positive commandment linked to it? Okay? If it's not a remedy, it's not a remedy. Full stop. Doesn't solve the problem, so to speak. And therefore, you deserve malchus for it. That's his answer. So, Ihachi, he says, Ihachi, if they're right that the positive commandment doesn't take away from the prohibition, comes the Gemara and says, Lav shenitek la'aseh nami. So the same thing should apply when there is a remedy. Now we go another extreme, right? The other extreme says, if a positive commandment takes away the severity, doesn't take away the severity of a prohibition, and the same thing should apply when the positive commandment serves as a remedy for the prohibition. Why suddenly then is there no lashes anymore? Why suddenly then do you rely on the positive commandment, the mitzvahs aseh, to remedy the prohibition? Bottom line is, it's a prohibition. So why? If your theory is, in other words, we're taking this theory to the other extreme. If your theory is that a positive commandment doesn't take away the severity of the situation, then how come when the positive commandment serves as a remedy after the prohibition, it does take away the malchus? Okay. You and I naturally, or I would answer, it's a little bit different. In one case, the positive commandment preceded the love, preceded the prohibition, stood alone on its own, away from the prohibition. In this case, we're discussing now, the positive commandment is a response to the prohibition. It's a remedy to the prohibition. So maybe we can differentiate. Anyway, the Gemara is asking in logic, if your logic is right, and the mitzvahs aseh, the positive commandment, doesn't take away from the severity of the Aveira is still an Aveira, then who cares if it's after or before? Irrelevant. The moment you have a lav, the moment you have a prohibition, you deserve malchus. That's the next question. So lav shenitek la'aseh nami. So if you have a negative commandment that's remedied or connected to a positive commandment, there too, you should have malchus. Now, as lema, you should say, just because God put in a positive commandment, migra gra, is it less severe than a regular prohibition? That you should say the same logic. That who cares if the positive commandment is remedying the love? The bottom line is God called it a prohibition. So if it's a prohibition, you deserve malchus for it. Over the next page, on to now, 15a4. Okay, so it says 15a4, Amalei. The Gemara says, or Rava says to him, Hahu lenatuke lav huda asa. So the mitzvah, the positive commandment that comes as a remedy, and can only be fulfilled after the prohibitions be done.
Oh, Daniel?
For example,
I never knew you could move the cursor with the pad.
For example, take for example returning stolen money. So if you steal money, you have to return that stolen money. Now you can't return the stolen money without stealing. So the positive commandment only comes because of the negative commandment. Okay, so in that situation, since the positive commandment can only be done after the prohibition, okay, and remedies the prohibition, in that case, it removes the severity of the situation. That's the answer. So the truth is, we knew this already, but it's just clarifying the logic. That when you have a positive commandment that follows a negative commandment, and the only time you can fulfill the positive commandment is after the negative commandment, it's actually there to remove the severity of the situation and will exempt you from malchus. You won't deserve lashes as a result because you've remedied the situation with the mitzvah.
But you're still guilty.
Sorry?
But you're still guilty.
Sure. Yeah. Well, guilty in the eyes of Hashem. Right? Guilty in the eyes of Hashem. Absolutely. You just won't get lashes for it. Now, as he concludes this note, the English art scroll point, but when this is not the special function of the positive commandment. In other words, the positive commandment is not there to remedy the law of the prohibition. The mere addition of it to a prohibition does not detract from the prohibition's malchus liability. When the mitzvah is unrelated to the remedy, when the mitzvah is just there and it precedes the prohibition, it's unrelated, and therefore the prohibition would deserve malchus, would deserve lashes in its own regard. So that's how we differentiate between the two. Now, we said earlier, in the name of Rava and Ravin, about remarrying. If a person who rapes a girl marries her and then divorces her and then remarries her, okay, he avoids malchus. He doesn't get lashes anymore because he remedied the prohibition. By marrying her, he remedied the prohibition. And we mentioned the way the words kol yemei chayecha, kol yomov, all his days. And we asked the question, what is kol yomov? Teaches us that he is under obligation to rise and marry her his entire life. So even if he doesn't do it immediately, that mitzvah remains an obligation forever. That's kol yomov. Which means that he's obligated to marry and he won't get malchus.
If he's obligated to marry her his entire life and he keeps putting it off, I mean, at what point does he get the malchus? At what point does he get the lashes?
No.
Because
in other words, right, because you're saying he never married her.
Yeah. He's obligated to now. He's not. So at what point you say, okay, fine, buddy, you missed a deadline. Come for your lashes. will it not be every day he's liable for lashes? Was it every day he has?
I think the next question may answer that. Let's just wait until the end of the page, and he may address your point.
Okay, great.
In terms of at what point does he get the malchus?
Okay. Also, the next set of pages, could you send through?
Yeah. So do you have 15 yet? 15A?
Up to 15A4.
Oh, so you're up to there. Give me a second.
Thanks.
A minute. Oh, I see your point. Okay, 1 second. That's how we go. So, says the Gemara. When we want to understand this din. Some people, there's an argument how to read the brayso that we just learned earlier. Where either you read, if you look at, let's go down to the footnote 31. The rule that one does not receive malchus for violating a prohibition that is remedied by a positive commandment means only that he does not incur malchus if he does not negate the positive commandment. So, if he observes the positive commandment, he won't incur malchus. But if he does negate it, meaning he doesn't fulfill the positive commandment, he does indeed receive malchus for his transgression. The brayso below states the distinction as follows. In the case of any prohibition that has in it the positive commandment, if the transgressor fulfills its positive commandment, he is not liable to lashes. If he nullifies its positive commandment, he is liable. The Gemara then notes that there is a discrepancy in the text of the brayso as cited, which contrasts fulfillment with nullification, rather than fulfillment with non-fulfillment, or nullification with non-nullification. The Gemara there cites two views as to the correct way to amend the brayso. One view is that the brayso should read, he nullified it, or do not nullify it. Meaning, did he follow the mitzvah, the positive commandment, the remedy, or do you not nullify it? Meaning other way around. He nullified it, meaning he didn't do it, or did he not nullify it, meaning he did do it. He did the positive commandment. That is, in the case of any prohibition that it's in it a positive commandment, if he nullified it, he is liable to lashes. If he did not nullify it, he is not liable. Okay. The other view is that the brayso should read, he fulfilled it or he did not fulfill it. That is, in the case of any prohibition that has in it a positive commandment, if he fulfilled it, he is not liable. If he did not fulfill it, he is liable. So now the question is like this. The question is the issue the nullifying of the positive commandment and the non-nullifying? Or is the issue the fulfilling of and this addresses Evan's point. Are we looking at whether he nullified the positive commandment? Or are we looking at whether he fulfilled the positive commandment and therefore doesn't get malchus? What motivates, what removes malchus? Does fulfilling the positive commandment as a remedy remove malchus? Or does not nullifying the positive commandment, that means you haven't nullified it. Did you do it yet? Don't know if you've done it yet, but you haven't nullified it. So by not nullifying the mitzvah, you won't get malchus because you're sort of in limbo. So Evan, the question is, let's see here. It all makes sense if, according to the version, who holds that's all based on nullification, he nullified it or he did not nullify it, meaning he nullified it means he disrespected it, was disrespectful, inappropriate, didn't follow. That's nullified. Or did not nullify, it means he was respectful. So it makes sense, Evan, that he'll never get Malchus. He can wait it out his whole life. He'll never get Malchus. Why? Because he hasn't nullified the positive commandment. Nullify means you disregard it. But the fact that you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you never nullified it, means you won't get Malchus, according to the first interpretation. So therefore, he's saying it makes sense. That vart about all your life makes sense, because you can wait your whole life. If you're waiting your whole life, you won't get lashes at all. But according to the version who holds that it's about whether you fulfilled or didn't fulfill, it's got nothing to do with nullifying or not nullifying. The question is, did you do the positive commandment? If you did the positive commandment, then you don't get Malchus. If you didn't do the positive commandment, you will get Malchus. So according to the second version, we're going to have a problem. What are you going to say? How can we say that he waits his entire life? How can we say he waits his entire life? If it all boils down to, did you fulfill or did you not fulfill, the reality is that if you haven't fulfilled yet, he actually says here, Evan, to answer your question, he says here, towards the end of that point, with the view that the transgressor incurs Malchus if he fails to perform the positive commandment as soon as the court orders him to do so. So when the court says you must go marry her again, and he doesn't go to marry her, already then he's transgressed, because he hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah, and therefore he'll get Malchus. So based on that, we don't understand the wording kol yomov. So what does it mean he waits his entire life? How could you wait the entire life? At some point, we need to make a decision. At some point, we need to decide, are we giving you lashes? You can't come to Beis Din and say, hold on, I'm going to marry her in 5 years' time. Be patient for me. No, it's either now or get Malchus, get lashes. So according to that opinion, it all boils down to, did you or did you not? Then we got a problem. What are we waiting for? How long are you going to wait for this? So I'm going over to 13 to 15b1. And by the way, how do you know this is a difficult Gemara coming up or a little complicated? It's because when you look at the Hebrew text, you see a small amount of writing. And when you look at the Tosfot and the Rashi that's around it, you see, boy, there's a lot of commentary here. So that shows you automatically you're in for a bit of a ride with this Gemara. Because obviously the commentaries felt it needed lots and lots of commentary, whereas other pages, not as much. Okay, so says the Gemara. Midihu taima el Rabbi Yochanan. Is their reason or their motivation maybe not like against Rabbi Yochanan? In other words, is the reason for their statement about Malchus all their days of their life are they there perhaps to explain someone else's opinion, not the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan? Let's see. Hamalei Rabbi Yochanan the Tana. Rabbi Yochanan said to the teacher of the Brisa, or the teacher of the Mishnah, same thing. He said, Tanai bitloi chayav, v'loi bitloi patur. He said that the version should be nullified. If he nullified it, then he's liable to lashes. Means he disregarded the positive mitzvah. If he did not nullify it, which means he observed the mitzvah, he's not liable to lashes. So now we see from here that Rabbi Yochanan holds that Malchus is actually based on nullified or not nullified. It's not based on fulfilled or not fulfilled. It's based on nullified or not nullified. And it was to explain his view that Rava and Ravin advanced their reason. Look at footnote number 2. As the Gemara answers the statement of Rava and Ravin need not conform with his view, he fulfilled it and he did not fulfill it. Because the purpose of their statement was solely to explain the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who subscribes to the view of he nullified it and he nullified it. In other words, Ravin and Rava actually agree with Rabbi Yochanan, who doesn't hold of the version fulfill or not fulfill. He holds of the version nullify or not nullify. So your whole life, you may not nullify. Your whole life, you're waiting to marry her. If your whole life you're waiting to marry her, then as Evan pointed out, it won't be lashes until that point, until for the rest of your life. And so therefore we're saying that these two opinions, Rava and Ravin, actually hold like Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan is the one that believes in the version of nullify or not nullify. And therefore, nullify, not nullify. And therefore, there won't be lashes because you haven't nullified. You may still be waiting, you haven't nullified. Okay? So he holds like Rabbi Yochanan. The question is, now we're going to come to where is Rabbi Yochanan's statement from? Where did Rabbi Yochanan say this? The Tani came with Rabbi Yochanan because they taught a brisa, it's like a Mishnah. They taught a brisa in Rabbi Yochanan's presence. Okay. What they teach? Kol mitzvahs lo yisaseh, every negative commandment, sheyesh ba kum aseh, which has in it a positive commandment. In other words, any prohibition that's remedied by a positive commandment, right? Kiyem aseh sheba, if he fulfilled the positive commandment, patur, he doesn't get lashes. That's the first half. Bitel aseh, if he nullified the positive commandment, which means he didn't fulfill, chayav, he'll get lashes because he didn't do the positive commandment. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan said to the author, my Kamart, what are you saying? You're inconsistent. Since it frees the transgressor from Malchus only if he fulfills the positive commandments when ordered by the court to do so, what makes him liable to Malchus only if he nullifies? Who said? If it's all about fulfilling the positive commandments, then the moment you don't fulfill, the moment you don't positively fulfill, you deserve Malchus. Since when do you, in other words, make up your mind, is it based on fulfilling or is it based on nullifying? Which one is the deciding factor? You fulfilled or not fulfilled, or you nullified or not nullified? You understand the difference? The difference is fulfill or not fulfill is this moment, right now. As Basin gave you the ruling, did you marry her? Did you not marry her? If you married her, you don't get Malchus. If you didn't marry her, you do get Malchus. That's the idea of fulfilling the mitzvah. Nullifying can go on forever. I did not nullify the mitzvah. And because I didn't nullify the mitzvah, in other words, I didn't disregard the mitzvah, I don't deserve Malchus. If I did disregard it, then obviously it's different. But I can wait my entire life. I can wait my entire life, and I never disregarded the mitzvah. So the question Rabbi Yochanan is asking is, make up your mind. What's the terminology here? Is it the terminology of kimoi, which means to fulfill, or is it the terminology of bitloi, which means to nullify? Okay. So So it says he says at the bottom, last line on the column. Kiem patur, lo kiem chayev. If you want to read in the Brisa the following words, if he fulfilled, he is not liable. You must say, if he does not fulfill, he is liable. So everything goes based on the fulfillment. Or, top of the right-hand column, bitel chayev. If he nullified it, means he disregarded it totally, he is liable. And lo bitel, if he did not nullify it, which means he's waiting and he's waiting and he's waiting, potter, he doesn't get malchus. In other words, you got to decide which way you're reading. And therefore came along Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Today, I choose the following version. I choose nullified. Bitloi, v'loi bitloi. If he nullified it, he is liable. If he did not nullify it, he is not liable. I.e., expressed both parts of the rule determining malchus in terms of whether or not he has nullified the correct positive commandment. That's Rabbi Yochanan's view. And that is going to be the view of Rava and Ravin, who say that your entire life you can wait for that mitzvah, and you'll wait and you'll wait and you'll wait before you marry her, and we can't give you malchus. We can't give you lashes. Why not? Because you've never nullified the commandment. You've just not nullified it. You're just waiting around. Shimon ben Lakish says, Kimoi v'loi kimoi. Kimoi v'loi kimoi. In other words, it goes based on the fulfillment. If he fulfilled it, he is not liable. If he did not fulfill it, he is liable. That's how it boils down to. Okay. Now, the question is going to be, what is the basis of their machloket? So one person says it's based on fulfillment. Did you do it or did you not do it? Another person says, no, it's not based on fulfillment. It's based on nullification. Did you disregard it and nullify it, or did you sit back and wait? Were you passive? So the question is, what is the root, the shoresh? What is the root of their machloket? What is the main purpose of what they're arguing about? Why? How do they get to their arguments? What's the logic behind their arguments? That's the next question of the Gemara. And this is a real Gemara cup, it's one thing to hear an argument, but now the judge says to the two two claims, to tell me your logic. What is the reason for your motivation? Why are you saying what you are saying? So that's what we're saying now to Rabbi Yochanan and to Rish Lakish. Is we understand that you differ in opinion. One person believes on fulfillment. One person believes on nullification. But we want to know, what is the motivation behind your opinion? They like him for the gi. Hasras. So let me just say, where's the problem? Let me just rephrase the question. They're both explaining the halacha that says that when there's a positive commandment, you don't give lashes. That's the halacha. When there's a positive commandment, you don't give lashes. The debate is what does it mean there's a positive commandment? Doesn't mean that you are fulfilling the positive commandment and that gets rid of lashes? Or does it mean that you did not nullify the positive commandment and therefore there's no lashes? Which way do we go? So they both agree on the psak, on the halacha, that there's no lashes with the positive commandment. The question is how to interpret that. Now the Gemara says, okay, so they agree on the din in that case. There won't be lashes when there's a positive commandment. But where will they differ? Because if their logic is different, and one person goes via fulfillment, and one person goes via nullification, where will they differ later on down the line? Because that generally will happen. When you have two people that disagree on the motivation of the law, so the law is the same, but the motivation is different, they are going to end up differing on something down the line, something practical down the line, because their logic is different. And automatically their logic is going to lead to differences. This is why, it's important, even within your own team at work, within your own environment, even though you both agree on the process now. So you both agree on the process, but if the motivation is different, in other words, if I'm doing it because of A and you're doing it because of B, although now the outcome may be the same, you're in a dangerous space. Because when another scenario plays out, you may act differently because your motivations were different. So that's what the Gemara is saying, is that although they agree on the principle that there's no malchus when there's a positive commandment, at the end of the day, they're disagreeing on motivation, they're disagreeing on interpretation, and there's going to be a halachic difference between them. And where's the halachic difference? That's what we're discussing now. The Ma'ika Mifligi, what are they actually arguing about? Where is the practical difference? He says, Bahasras Sofek Kamifligi. It's talking about a situation of an uncertain warning. Look at footnote number 5. In order for Malchus to be administered, the sinner must be warned before his transgression, and the act he's about to perform will render him liable to Malchus. You got to warn him. The dispute regards cases in which the warning cannot state with certainty and the act will make him liable to Malchus, but only it might make him liable. Can the court administer Malchus on the basis of such an uncertain warning? That's the question. So let's get back into the Gemara. Ma'asavar, one opinion holds, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who believes in nullification and not nullification. Ma'asavar hasra sofek shmo hasra. The first opinion says that an uncertain type of warning is considered a valid warning, and therefore Malchus can be given on its basis. And because, therefore, he can hold the view that Malchus depends on whether he nullified it or did not nullify it. Even though he presumes that Malchus can be given on the basis of an uncertain warning, hold on. If Malchus can be given on the basis of an uncertain warning, whether he nullified it. Why is that? 1 second. Right. So, I want to read footnote number 6, because this is where he explains this point. In other words, we're stating two things. Uncertain warning will lead to Malchus, and that opinion will also hold nullified and not nullified. Let's see inside. Number 6, as explained above, the view that Malchus depends on whether he nullified it or did not nullify it understands that the negation of the positive commandment is the finalization of the prohibition's violation. Right? The negation of the positive commandment. So if you disregard and you negate the positive commandment, that's when you've actually transgressed the prohibition, and that's when you get Malchus. Only if you nullify the prohibition. By the way, I'll give you an example. What does it mean to nullify a prohibition? Let's say you're supposed to marry her, right? We're going to read it now. But you make a neder you make a neder, a promise that I'll never marry her again. That's considered a total negation of the positive commandment, because you're now sworn that you won't marry her. And the moment you do that, you then are finalizing the prohibition of divorcing her, because now you won't marry her again, and then you deserve Malchus. The prohibition is thus not fully violated until the positive remedy is nullified as well. In the present case, for example, in which the oines is required to marry his victim and is forbidden to divorce her, he does not fully transgress the prohibition against divorcing her until he also makes it impossible for him to remarry her by means of an unalterable vow, and effectively forbids the remarriage. The moment you do that, that's when you transgress the prohibition. It follows then that the warning, which must precede the basic transgression, in this case the divorce, cannot state with certainty the warning that divorce will result in a Malchus liability, since it is not certain he will finalize the transgression by subsequently nullifying the positive commandments. So because it's doubtful, the warning is doubtful, we don't know if he's going to get Malchus or not. Since the law is that he does receive Malchus if he nullifies the positive commandments, this view must hold that an uncertain warning is indeed a valid warning. Right. In other words, you don't know if he's going to violate or negate the mitzvah. So when you warned him about the prohibition, did you know what's an uncertain warning? Uncertain warning means, how do we translate uncertain warning? We say number 5. Yeah, a certain warning means you know for a fact that this mitzvah will bring him Malchus. So this prohibition will bring him Malchus. What's an uncertain warning? I don't know if this is going to bring him Malchus. Why won't you know that? Why don't you know for sure that this prohibition of divorce is going to bring him Malchus? It must be that he may transgress this prohibition and yet never get Malchus again. How do we know? Because if he doesn't negate the mitzvah and he pushes it off and pushes it off and pushes it off and pushes it off, he won't get Malchus. So what do you see from here? That the person who believes in nullify or not nullify, right? And the scenario is he can push it off and push it off as long as he wants, must also hold that an uncertain warning where you don't know for sure what the outcome is going to be is considered enough of a warning. So when you come to a guy and you say to a guy, if you divorce her, you're going to get Malchus. Are you certain about that? You don't know. You don't know. He may not get Malchus. If he never negates the prohibition, in other words, he never makes an oath if he never negates the mitzvah, in other words, he never makes an oath to negate the mitzvah, he won't get Malchus. So when you warned him, you actually didn't know. You didn't know. So the opinion who holds that we go via nullification or not nullification must also hold that a doubtful warning is enough of a warning. That's the bottom line of that answer. Let's see the ending, the last page. Umar Savar, the other opinion, the last line. Umar Savar, the other opinion, and this is now Reish Lakish. Hasra Sofek Lo Shmo Hasra. A doubtful warning is not considered doubtful. In other words, you need to know for a fact that he will get Malchus if he transgresses this prohibition. Now, hold on.
Rabbi, who polices this? I mean, who would be that judge that decides, okay, you are prolonging for the rest of your life, or you're going to nullify it? And who's the person then that's going to stand up and say, but you are disrespecting the rule?
Right, based in the local based in, the local based in. So just give me a second here. The local based in are the ones that are going to. They're the ones that will decide if he's overstepped his boundary or not. Understand, Peter?
Yes,
They're the local base will be the ones to decide whether he's overstepped or hasn't overstepped.
Sure. So they would have to really read through this carefully and then determine which one is really
exactly. Now they have to see. Well, first of all, you have to decide who you hold like. Do you hold like Reish Lakish, who goes based on fulfillment or not fulfillment, or do you go based on Rabbi Yochanan, that you go via nullification or not nullification? That's the first thing you have to decide.
But now, either one, you're right in a way.
Yeah, you have to decide one. Absolutely, you have to decide one. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
I should have finished this last point before we wrap up here. Reish Lakish holds, let's just clarify this point, that an uncertain warning is not considered a valid warning. So if you're not sure if he's going to get lashes or not, that's not considered a valid warning. And therefore, he cannot hold the view that Malchus depends on nullified or not nullified. Look at footnote 7. For since that view understands the transgression itself as lacking finality, without the nullification of the positive commandments, only an uncertain warning is possible in advance. There could never then be a penalty of Malchus in such cases. According to Reish Lakish, who holds an uncertain warning is not valid. But he must hold the view that Malchus depends on whether he fulfilled it or he did not fulfill it, which does not presume that Malchus can be given on the basis of an uncertain warning. If you look at footnote 8, for according to this view, the transgression is complete immediately upon the divorce. As he divorces her, making the transgressor liable to Malchus. It is only that the transgressor has the option of substituting, in other words, Evan, back to Evan's point. At that point, you've got the choice. When you divorced her, at the moment of divorce, you've got lashes. But now you've got the choice. You had the option of substituting fulfillment of the positive commandment to remarry her, now for the Malchus. If he does so immediately upon being instructed by the court to do so, then he's fine. Thus, the warning that preceded the transgression is a definite warning. He will incur the penalty of Malchus if he divorces her, although he will have the option of substituting fulfillment of the positive commandment for the Malchus. In other words, what the footnote is addressing, let me just point this out for a second. According to this opinion, that you go via fulfillment now, the moment of divorce. Are you marrying her, remarrying her, or you're not going to remarry her, right? He wants to say, how do you know for sure that he's going to agree to marry her? Sorry, how do you know for sure? In other words, it's also uncertain. You also don't know what the outcome is going to be. When you warn him initially, don't divorce her, right? Can you say for certainty that if you divorce her, you're going to get Malchus? Not necessarily, because if he decides to remarry her, then you won't get Malchus. So I think what the footnote is pointing out is, why is that considered certain? In other words, right? Why is that considered certain? So what's the answer? The answer is that at the moment of divorce, according to this opinion, at the moment of divorce, you're already guilty and deserving of Malchus. We give you one moment to exchange that. You've got the choice. You can exchange your Malchus if you remarry her. Now's your choice, right now. Do you want to remarry her? If you remarry her, you can exchange your malchus. You won't get lashes. If you don't remarry her, in other words, you don't fulfill the mitzvah, then you will get the lashes. So that is considered a vadai. That's considered certainty. I am certain that when you divorce her, you're going to get lashes. If they let you off the hook, okay, that's because the positive commandment replaced the lashes. In contrast to the original opinion, in contrast to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it can go on and on and on. Your whole life you can wait. And if you wait your whole life, then you've actually never been given lashes, or you'll never be given lashes. And therefore, when I warned you initially that if you divorce her, you're going to get lashes, it's not true. Because if he dawdles and he lingers and he waits and he doesn't end up marrying her, but as long as he hasn't made an oath to negate it, right, he can prolong it his entire life and he won't get lashes. So therefore, that's considered an uncertain warning. So based on that, that's where the machloket is going to be. Remember, I told you, if you disagree on motivation or reasoning, you're going to have a practical difference down the line. What's the practical difference? Whether an uncertain warning is considered a warning or not. That's the halachic difference. According to Rabbi Yochanan, an uncertain warning is considered enough of a warning. And according to Reish Lakish, no, an uncertain warning is not considered enough of a warning. In other words, you've got to be 100% certain that I'm going to get lashes for this punishment. And you don't know that for sure. In the case of nullification or not nullification, you don't know for sure, and therefore it won't be considered, an uncertain warning won't be considered that case. Okay, so then the Gemara next week we're going to discuss the Gemara is going to show you how there's actually a source of this. There's actually going to be a source for this, where we see Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish arguing regarding the uncertain warning. So we're going to bring a proof to actually support the Gemara's analysis of the situation. But for now, we're going to stop here. Let me just pause the